Good afternoon and a warm welcome this Friday afternoon to our fifth EuroCommerce Policy Talk. We're very proud today to welcome Commissioner Sinkevicius. Today we will very much focus on environment, sustainability, and also more specifically on circular economy, which is one of the major strategy of the EU as part of the European Green Deal. We have a very high record number of participants. We are close to 400 participants for this webinar. So I think this tells a lot about the success of all these talks, where we have a 1-hour discussion with a major European politicians. Remember, use Twitter and the hashtag EU Policy Talks if you want to tweet about this policy talk. And the policy talk is also on record, so it will be recorded and available on the EuroCommerce YouTube channel as soon as the talk is over. So let me first turn to our guest, and we're very pleased to indeed welcome Commissioner Virginijus Sinkevičius. He's himself a record breaker because he was the first millennial commissioner. He entered the European Commission at the unbelievable age of 29, and already having had a major career behind him in politics, obviously in Lithuania, member of the parliament, minister of the economy and innovation, before also having very important in terms of investment, and also engage even in the private, having also part of his life in the private sector. So very warm welcome, Commissioner, and I will give you the floor, so you will speak to us about how you see the Europe going in terms of the circular economy and fulfilling an important part of the European Green Deal. And after that, we will take some questions. I have, like when we had with Vice President Timmermans, I have my dear colleague Isabelle Morisi, who is our head of environment and sustainability, who will curate and has curated the questions that we have received prior to the talk, and we also receive as we go on, and hopefully then we'll have very interesting conversation. So, Commissioner, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and of course, good afternoon to everyone, and thank you for this invitation. I'm very pleased to speak to you today because this year we will be working together very closely, more closely than usual, as we are planning a number of new initiatives that will affect your sector. And today I want to be clear about what they are, and I want to reassure you that these are areas where your input will be very valuable. And we share many goals. And Europe needs your help because we can't deliver these plans without you. So I very much want to continue our close collaboration. We need to be clear about the global context, about why we keep asking for change. We started last year, this decade, with great enthusiasm. The economy was doing well, and we made sound plans to make it perform better in the long term. And then the virus struck with its devastating effects on lives and livelihoods. And I know that your sector has been suffering a lot. The EU mobilized to respond to the crisis. We have unfolded an unprecedented recovery package. Now we hope that we can look ahead with more confidence and optimism. And even in these hard times of numerous immediate urgencies, we didn't lose focus. The European Green Deal remained our compass, our strategy for sustainable growth and recovery. And the fact is, there are looming crises we can't ignore. On the climate front, the UN is warning that the world is now heading for more than 3 degrees of warming this century, far beyond the goals of the Paris Agreement. On the biodiversity front, 60% of the world's ecosystems are degraded, and around 1 million animal and plant species are now threatened with extinction. And when you add in pollution and our excessive consumption of resources, we have a backdrop of global emergencies that are affecting not only our planet, but also profits and prosperity. at the heart of the Green Deal is a vision of a more circular economy, a more rational economy that offers hope for industry and relief for the environment. I say hope for industry because studies show that businesses embracing the model outperform traditional competitors. And that comes from cost savings and increased revenue with more customer loyalty and better brand recognition. Elements that are extremely important for your long-term future. Now, when we talk about circular economy, we need to keep the circular economy action plan at the forefront of our minds. It's a plan to reduce our consumption footprint and double Europe's circular material use rate in the coming decade. And it is well on track. A new regulatory framework for batteries has just been adopted with mandatory requirements for all batteries placed on the EU market and sustainability requirements for the whole life cycle. Further down the track, the agenda to drive the twin, green, and digital transition is even more ambitious. This year, you can expect legislative initiatives to empower consumers and tackle greenwashing. Consumers will be able to choose green products more easily with better protection against unscrupulous claims. There will be targeted actions for key value chains where the potential for circularity is high. We will be concentrating on the production, use, and recycling of goods such as textiles and electronics, as well as plastics, packaging, food, and buildings. And we will explore new tools, notably digital product passports. And at the end of the year, we will propose an overarching sustainable products initiative to transform product design. We are aiming to make circularity the norm, reducing waste and minimizing environmental impact through life cycles. It will build on the successes of the Eco-Design Directive, and I'm sure that in the longer term, it will bring many benefits to businesses and consumers. If we want an efficient circular economy, we need all stakeholders to work together. That puts retailers in a very important position. You can influence both production patterns and consumer behavior, enable more sustainable and circular consumption patterns, but any transition requires investment. It means changing in-store equipment, better waste management, more renewable energy, different packaging and transportation, eco-design, and so on. It also means retraining workers, reorganizing supply chains, and more circular business models. It probably means investing in optimizing the delivery of online purchases and reducing packaging waste. And there is also an element of raising customer awareness, showing them that they can make more sustainable choices. Let's start by looking at textiles. It's a vital sector for any economy. And in Europe, it means jobs for 1.7 million people and a turnover of 166 billion euros. But the environmental footprint is extremely large. In fact, it's the fourth highest pressure category for the use of primary raw materials and water, and the fifth for CO2 emissions. The pandemic has disrupted supply and demand, disrupted waste streams, and severely affected the international trade in second-hand textile products. Textiles are a priority for European Green Deal. The Circular Economy Action Plan and the Industrial Strategy and an EU strategy is on the way. The aim is to ensure that a more sustainable, more resilient textiles sector emerges from the COVID crisis. There is a lot to do because textiles are very far from being circular. The volumes are increasing, the margins are decreasing, and clothes are worn for a shorter time than ever before. More circularity would mean big gains for the environment and the climate. If you use a garment for twice as long, you cut its CO2 emissions in half. The sustainable textile strategy is planned for the end of this year. We are aiming to make sector more competitive, to apply circular principles to production, products, consumption, waste, secondary raw materials, and to boost investments in research and innovation. Consumers will be empowered to choose sustainable textiles and get easy access to reuse and repair services with better information on the environmental impact of textile products on labels, for instance. And we also want to support product as service models, circular materials and production processes and international cooperation. And of course, there will be more measures for end of life with an increase in textile sorting, reuse, and recycling. This might also include more extended producer responsibility. If this sounds intimidating, it shouldn't. It's a chance to try out new business models and to build brand loyalty. Our study showed that 88% of EU citizens believe that clothing should last longer. This is a chance to try and meet that demand. The next big area to look at is, of course, food. In the battle against climate change and biodiversity loss, food retailers and wholesalers have a major role to play. More circularity could almost have the emissions of the food system by 2050. And as we need to be carbon neutral by mid-century, we have to go down this road. The Farm to Fork strategy adopted as part of the European Green Deal is our path to a sustainable food system. The aim is to transform the way we produce, process, transport, market, and consume food products, delivering a system that has a neutral or positive environmental impact and helping reverse the loss of biodiversity. If we succeed, we will lead the world in a transition to a globally sustainable food system. The strategy contains a lot of guidance and support for producers, but there are elements there for the whole food value chain. Retailers and wholesalers need to ensure that their own activities are sustainable, but they also need to promote healthy, sustainable choices to consumers and help suppliers transition to more sustainable product methods. So it's very reassuring to see that EuroCommerce is already engaged in efforts to develop a code of conduct for responsible business and marketing practices in the food system. Our aim is to work with all relevant stakeholders to develop a code with not just ambitious but practicable as well. And when we build on best practice, we can raise the performance of whole sector. And of course, thank you very much for your work in this so far. But let's now turn to chemicals. This is an area where feelings run high. More than 8 in 10 Europeans are worried about the impact of chemicals in everyday products on the environment and on their health. Nearly 9 out of 10 are worried about the impact of products made of plastic and microplastics. So when we adopted the EU chemical strategy for sustainability, we made sure there were actions to make products safe and sustainable by design. Many European companies are already investing in their innovative capacity to provide and use safe and sustainable chemicals. And of course, we already have sophisticated chemicals legislation supported by the most advanced knowledge base in the world. But we need more. We need to do more. And science is showing us the areas where urgent action is needed. Endocrine disruptors are one example. Chemicals that cause cancer, asthma, and diseases of the immune and the cardiovascular systems are another. So the reality is that citizens, including the most vulnerable, are still too exposed to some very harmful chemicals, in particular through consumer products. Global chemicals production is expected to double by 2030 and use will grow accordingly. So there is no time to lose. The strategy should ensure that the chemicals causing long-term effects on human health and the environment are substituted as far as possible. Starting with the most harmful chemicals, we are proposing a more preventive approach. The presence of the most harmful chemicals should only allowed if their use is proved to be essential. One priority is a ban on PFAS. They are currently used in non-sticking coatings in clothing and frying pans, but they are what we call forever chemicals. They are highly persistent and they have caused enormous health and environmental damage around the world. So we will only allow their use when it is essential for society. We'll also be adopting common criteria to identify endocrine disruptors and applying them across legislation. We want these to be clearly identifiable and ensure they are no longer used, especially in consumer products. There will also be updates of sectoral legislation covering toys, for example, and of REACH. There is a lot to do, but this is an opportunity for Europe to lead the world in the green transition. If there is one region in the world that can really achieve a vision of a toxic-free environment, avoiding harm to the planet and to current and future generations, I think that's Europe. And let's show that it can be done. For 10 years now, the Commission has worked very closely with EU retailers through the EU Retail Forum. And looking back, that has been extremely helpful. But now it's time to go further and transform this collaboration. We need to do more together to address the urgent crisis and define our times, the climate crisis. So the biodiversity crisis and environmental pollution. And for each of them, and for emerging from the COVID crisis as well, part of the answer has to be more circular economy. It's the great enabler of the changes to come. Coupling social and environmental resilience with business opportunities. So I very much look forward to scaling up our collaboration and moving into high gear with you and through European Circular Economy Stakeholder Platform, sharing tools, sharing solutions, and exploring the green and digital approaches we need for the 21st century. Circular consumption patterns and circular business models. So together with you, I want to drive this process of change, giving citizens the sustainable future they need and deserve. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Commissioner, for this quite impressive tour d'horizon. You covered food, textile, chemicals, and toys, and a number of other value chains. So that's quite impressive in terms of the number of value chains where we need to change that. We've received a number of questions ahead of the talk, covering from basic principles, how to deal with these issues across a number of sectors and value chains, around specific product value chains, on the role of consumers. But I'm calling here about my colleague Isabelle Morisi, or head of environment and sustainability at EuroCommerce, to ask you the first question.
Indeed, thank you and good afternoon. Thank you also to all of the participants who contributed with some very relevant questions. There are numerous of them, so we have tried to combine them, and I apologize in advance for the questions that will not be raised today. Maybe I'd like to start with maybe a general questions regarding the shift on paradigm. You mentioned that we're here to upscale good practices and incentivize the upscale of circular economy, and you have mentioned several good examples that I think most of people in Brussels are quite eager to see developed in the next month. Maybe if you can provide us a bit more insight into how you think the EU can support to industry, but also mainly the retail industry, to innovate, rethink, and redesign products. And we also can, so that on one hand, how to shift from the traditional way of living and consuming to a more business product as a service. And in parallel to that, how can you help the industry that already doing that and upscale their practices? I'm thinking of the startups as much as the social economy enterprise that are dealing in collecting and sorting of certain products.
Okay, thank you very much for your question. I would say that Commission is supporting a change in business practice, and this starts by examining which circular business models work best and why they work best. And a number of business approaches are not new. For instance, renting, leasing, reuse, and product and service models. Then we need to facilitate the use of financial incentives to support the most effective circular business models. Finally, changes and at product level can also encourage businesses to adopt more sustainable approaches, for example, mandatory rules on circular product design, rules that make producers more responsible for repairability and reuse of their products, and even after purchase, and rules that require better information on product sustainability to be made available to consumers. It might be even digitally. These are measures that have the potential to profoundly influence how business operates, and the Sustainable Products Initiative will, of course, look directly at this aspect.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Yes. And in terms, so you mentioned the business side of it, and I mean, most of the industry and economic operators in Europe are also looking at the overall single market. We have seen that some national initiatives are a bit more advanced than others. Do you have a specific plan on providing a smooth transition to a circular economy in all member states, and including in maybe the less advanced member states?
Absolutely. Very good question.
Not mine.
Doesn't matter. We address it to all. But the question is good, because we always have, I think in any sort of initiative the EU takes, we have the most ambitious ones, and we have less ambitious ones, and we're always trying to sort of fill that gap and really get them together, and of course make that whole EU moves together without increasing that gap in between. So here I would say a few things. First of all, cohesion policy, which is the EU's main investment policy, with its 300 billion euro over the next 7 years, will be a key instrument to deliver the goals of the European Green Deal on the ground, with significant investments in climate-related and environmental projects in all regions and cities. In addition, it will finance innovation to green the economy and support smart economic transformation. All cohesion instruments have ambitious climate spending targets ranging from 25% in REACT-EU to 100% for the Just Transition Fund. Among the many actions that can be financed under cohesion policy, let me mention just a few examples. Helping companies innovate to contribute to the circular economy, supporting research that greens the economy, including providing for sustainable products across the value chain, and bringing nature back in our cities. The support is most significant for the least developed, of course, regions of Europe, as the policy's goal is to reduce socioeconomic and territorial disparities. And cohesion policy also helped by excluding investments into unsustainable solutions, for example, fossil fuels, and focusing investments on top and sustainable solutions like recycling.
I think on the, can I ask specifically on when you talk about changing business models and EPR, extended producer responsibilities, and is of course linked with having the right sort of infrastructure. And we have seen before this, my role here in EuroCommerce, I also happen to work in packaging, and we've seen how it has taken several decades before the concept of extended producer responsibility got into the minds of people, that the proper infrastructure for collection, sorting, and recycling took place. Now you want to introduce that on a number of other value chain, and whilst I think the principle is laudable, if you think about textile, for example, and whether it is garment or mattresses or a number of other textile product, I mean, there we're much more in the infancy of establishing the right sort of infrastructure for properly sorting. And how do you see that? And of course, you can hope of new industries being created, being developed. We got a similar question also on chemicals, and particularly when the idea of exporting a lot of waste outside Europe is becoming less and less of an option. We know that Asia and China in particular rejecting more. Is the planning to really develop further sorting and collecting and recycling infrastructure in Europe? Will that come with public investment? Because typically, I think the value chain that produces and distributes can help a little bit with the collection, but there's a lot of cost involved in sorting and in recycling and creating a true circular economy, and therefore a new economy in a way where material, I think, may not yet be the same sort of command the same sort of price as virgin material.
So, of course, very, very complex question, and let me take it in a bit. First of all, of course, we want to address impact across the whole life cycle, from sourcing and harmful substances to design, consumption patterns, and business models. We intend to ensure the coherence of existing policy tools such as extended producer responsibility schemes, green public procurement, and eco-label, and make the most of the upcoming obligations of separate collections of textiles as of 2025. And we are working with industry and other markets across market actors along the value chain to identify bottlenecks in circularity, and of course stimulate innovation. Now, what is also very important here, maybe I would like to focus even more on extended producers' responsibility, is of course a 2018 amendment to the Waste Water Framework Directive introduced for the first time general minimum requirements for extended producers' responsibility schemes. And their aim is to introduce a level of harmonization to improve the transparency, governance, and cost efficiency for all existing EU level and national level extended producers' responsibility schemes. So current EU rules in the Waste Framework Directive require the member states to set up national extended producer responsibility scheme for certain waste streams. According to the same provisions, the Commission shall publish guidelines on cross-border cooperation concerning extended producer responsibility. So seeing that the EPR schemes is a national competence reserved to the member states, and that this is thus a recent choice by the EU co-legislators, and the Commission is currently working to streamline EPR requirements across the member states, and in this way achieve a more level playing field. Guidelines on the interpretation of the minimum requirements for EPR schemes in the Water Framework Directive are being prepared, which will be published this year. The Commission is also setting binding and common EPR requirements in product legislation, such as proposal for a regulation on batteries and waste batteries issued 10th of December 2020. And now, last part of your question on secondary raw materials. First of all, there must be sufficient demand to ensure that economies of scale play fully in favor of the market for secondary materials. The Commission is promoting the increase of separate waste collection and recycling in order to put those resources back into economy. Introducing requirements for recycled content in products will also contribute to preventing a mismatch between supply and demand of secondary raw materials. The recently adopted proposal on batteries and waste batteries is a good example for both actions. Remaining barriers to internal trade of secondary markets, for instance, should also be removed. And this is one of the aims of the reform of the waste shipment regulation. And the Commission will furthermore assess the scope to develop EU-wide end-of-waste criteria for certain waste streams based on monitoring member states application of the revised rules on end-of-waste status and byproducts. We will also assess the feasibility of establishing a market observatory for key secondary materials. And of course, to finalize answer to your very complex question, our cohesion funding, LIFE and other resources are ready to be mobilized to assist member states and the economic operators in the waste sector.
Thank you very much for a comprehensive answer to that. Isabel, next question.
Well, if we can stay into the EPR questions, because I think we received quite a lot of inquiry on that matter, I would like to just mention one challenge that we face at the moment, which is compliance and enforcement of certain EPR duties. We have faced, and I think every EU-based economic operator have faced this challenge about having to compete with the non-compliant third countries importers shipping their products to the EU market. And some of the members have calculated that for small and medium enterprise, having to pay fees from to ship into one EU member state would cost at least 5,000 euros. So if you're a small SME, that means a lot of administrative burden and financial resources to comply to each EU member state's EPR scheme. And I mean, the question has the Commission tried to think of a EU one-stop shop approach in order to kind of streamline and ease the compliance part of the EU, so of the EPR. So at least if there's the players that want to comply can comply. Yeah. And how can you also look at enforcement in a better manner or help the member states into enforcing?
Okay, thank you for a question. I mean, I covered quite a lot of it in my previous answer, but I can of course link it. As I mentioned, the 2018 amendment to the Water Framework Directive introduced for the first time general minimum requirements for EPR schemes. And of course, their aim was harmonization or an improvement of transparency, governance, and cost efficiency for all existing EU level and national level EPR schemes. Currently, of course, member states they set up a national, extended, EPR schemes for certain waste streams. And of course, Commission shall publish guidelines on cross-border cooperation, which is part of your question concerning the EPR. As we said, we're going to do it already this year. Nevertheless, seeing the EPR schemes is a national competence reserved to the member states, and that this is thus a recent choice by EU co-legislators. And Commission is currently working on those, streamlined requirements across the member states. As we said, they will be harmonized, they will be equal, and guidelines on the interpretation of the minimum requirements for EPR schemes is in the Water Framework Directive are being prepared, which, as I said, will be published this year. What Commission is also doing is setting binding and common EPR requirements in product legislation, such as the proposal for a regulation on batteries, probably the best and quite recent example.
Thank you very much. As part of the circular economy, so you mentioned waste, but also the better design of the products is extremely important. Studies show that 80% of the environmental performance of products can be actually improved at design level. And so we received quite a lot of questions on how do you see the Eco-Design Directive to contribute to this circular economy, especially, it's also almost a philosophical question, especially when products are becoming even more complex than ever. There are some questions about that, and if you have a specific guideline, timeline on that, if you have the time.
Okay. So first of all, speaking, I think already our current eco design is quite a success story. But of course, we want to get more out of it. So the EU eco design rules have been improving the environmental performance of energy-related products already for many years. And under the eco design working plan 2016-2019, circularity aspects such as repairability and recyclability have been systematically assessed when revising or preparing new implementing measures. And the success of this approach has been acknowledged by multiple stakeholders across industry, also at the national level, and by consumers. And we remain convinced that its focus on design phase of products is essential one. And going forward, and with the Sustainable Products Initiative, we will extend the scope of the Eco Design Directive to cover a much wider range of products, such as already discussed textiles or furniture and so on. And we will use it to go even further in areas such as extended producer responsibility for circularity, considering, as an example, considering producer responsibility for repairability, reusability, and reuse of their products. We also consider how revised eco-design rules can best address the complexity and fast pace at which products are now being designed, including examining if measures to counter planned obsolescences, extend product lifespans, and provide increased information to consumers on for example, spare part availability. All that can be included more systematically, and other requirements such as on minimum recycled content in products, or information on a product's environmental footprint will be also carefully examined.
No, indeed, the Eco-Design Directive has this advantage of looking at definition in a technical manner, so everyone understands what is required, and indeed we perceive it as a success story. Looking at the time, I think we have looked at the design, the societal support. We look at how to handle the waste. So maybe we could also see how you and we perceive the consumer empowerment part of the circular economy. I think we all consumer, citizen, and so there was one question about, in your view, what can be the role and what should be the role of consumers to speed up the transition to a circular economy. It's a very broad question, but I mean, I can go into further detail if you want.
No, all good. Let's try me to touch upon it, and then you will see if it's we manage sufficiently cover, and then you might want to add. So, indeed, informed consumers can significantly speed up the transition towards the circular economy, and this is why the Commission is also looking at instruments that will bring the appropriate information to consumers, mobilizing also the potential of digitalization. The majority of EU consumers consider themselves occasional consumers of environmentally friendly products. I'm speaking about 54%. And more than a quarter often buy environmentally friendly products. A 2019 study carried out by the International Trade Center for the European Commission found that a large majority, 85% of the surveyed retailers from 5 European countries reported increased sales of sustainable products during the 2013 to 2018, and even more of them, 92%, predicted that the sales of sustainable products will go up even more. So the recent open public consultation on consumer policy, strengthening the role of consumers in green transition, confirmed that a high proportion of consumers, the representatives, public authorities, and NGOs agree that the lack of information on the sustainability of products is a barrier. is a barrier to green transition. And figures such as these show that consumers are more and more ready to act if they have the information and possibility, of course, to do so.
Yes, I think anyway, there's also a lot of different type of consumers, and it's always the challenge for us at least to just ensure that we serve and offer the right product to all of the type of consumers. Indeed, information is one of the tools. Just information is not necessarily labels, but that's me. But I think it's quite important to also ensure that it's a multi-stakeholder approach, and consumers are part of the solution as well. And I think it's nice to hear that. There are some specific questions about how you plan on providing information about specifically durability, repairability, but you touch upon it through the review of the Eco-Design Directive. And
I can maybe add slightly here. Is that, of course, that the information is crucial, and under the Sustainable Products Initiative, the Commission will mobilize the potential of the digitalization of product information, including solutions such as digital passport, tagging, and watermarks with digital information on circularity aspects such as durability, repairability, recyclability of the product. And the Commission is, of course, furthermore looking into substantiating specific green claims through the footprint method for products and organizations, and the legislation on green claims would oblige companies making such claims to substantiate them properly, and thus making an environmental claim would remain voluntary, but substantiating specific claims through a sound methodology would be mandatory. So the proposal is expected around the middle of this year, and of course there are other initiatives that we are looking into making carbon footprint information available based on the environmental footprint approach, and as I said, a good example is batteries and batteries regulation.
Can I maybe on this point bring? I know you're not responsible for trade and customs, but I think it is an overall picture. Is that we all Europeans support, and all European business supporting, sort of putting the bar very high in terms of sustainability specification for products, whether it is with digital passports and watermark, etc. The key question, of course, a lot of actually European consumers are buying things online these days, stuff that are coming from outside Europe, which do not apply the same principles. And how do you see that? I mean, there's tons of products coming into the ports of Rotterdam and creating, in a way, a bit of an unlevel playing field for bona fide retailers and wholesalers who are complying and only will have within their store or on their web shops products that are fully compliant with EU legislation. How do you plan to actually set a level playing field and making sure that the European players who are playing by the rules, having this sort of products, are not to be competed out, basically because value and price still plays a very important role, and people buying stuff coming from outside Europe?
Of course. So very, very, very important note. And first of all products should comply. And key is of course market surveillance is the key. And of course it's a challenge. We support very much member states in inspections. But there is no doubt that the sustainability criteria would apply to all products placed on the EU market. And this is already the case for products subject to eco-design, implementing measures, and this ensures a level playing field in the internal market. And the possibility to introduce requirements linked to environmental or social aspects along the value chain from production through the use to end of life will be carefully, of course, assessed, including in the context of WTO rules. And the initiative would enable mandatory measures such as minimum sustainability requirements for products or requirements for information on the sustainability of products, possibly complemented by other approaches and initiatives when relevant and, of course, appropriate.
Isabel, what else do we have?
I think we covered most of it. There are some questions about maybe if you want to extend the debate to other topics, you touch upon biodiversity. If you want to, I mean, we received some questions about how do you closely want to integrate the biodiversity concern within the circular economy. Well, you put it into your introduction, but if you want to detail it a bit more, I think the audience will be happy.
So the question is how the circular economy and biodiversity commitments will be going through together, or
how do you plan to?
I mean, if you have, I mean, I can probably paraphrase that. If you have a sustainability label or sustainability information, I mean, it can be about circularity of the product, but it can also be about biodiversity impact.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, this idea of having
it's I think both are very important and both fulfilling each other. If we don't want to fail again on our biodiversity aims, implementing circular economy action plan is crucial, because we know that extraction of resources puts enormous pressure on biodiversity. It's one of the main drivers of biodiversity loss, and the key on answering that is, of course, the circular economy action plan. Now, looking even further on impacts, I would say that here is very important, of course, to make sure that consumers, they have the full picture, and that they see that they contributing to circularity, but on the other hand, of course, to climate or biodiversity goals. And the transition to circularity will, of course, help us address the biodiversity crisis. And as I mentioned, more than 90% of biodiversity loss and water stress come from resource extraction and processing materials, fuels, and food. We already discussed textiles, which are going to be, again, extremely important. And I think we were quite successful, speaking of the textile, to make textiles free of child labor or illegal labor. Now I think we have to follow similar steps to make textiles free of biodiversity loss.
Yes, I think it's all interlinked and intertwined anyway. So indeed, I mean, if you use less resources, you have less impact on biodiversity. Christian, do you have another question? Or
well, I thought from the question we received an interesting one, since you're also responsible for fisheries and oceans, and indeed we talk about biodiversity. So, a very simple: how can circularity be applied to fisheries?
There is multiple. Thank you very much for your question. There is multiple, ways of do it. Starting from reusing, using and properly returning water into oceans, starting from the ports activities. Speaking, of course, of nets, fishing gears which is used, and I already seen some very prominent startups, companies who already using. I mean, I was impressed how people take. Just go to a container where the old fishing nets are thrown away, taking it from the container and reusing it and making glass frames out of it and so on. So there is definitely plenty ways of introducing circularity into fishing sector is one, but in general into a blue economy, because when we speak about circularity, I named you the key sectors which we're going to be applying, but others also have to follow, because one is that others will have a competitive advantage. Two is again, when we speak about circularity, I think we're speaking about the high intake uptake of innovations, and I think this is crucial and important for any sector to remain competitive.
If you look at the COVID crisis we have had, I mean, a lot of businesses have had major setbacks. The EU and the member states have had to open their purses quite significantly to keep a number of businesses afloat, making sure that people will not go into permanent unemployment. How do you see? I mean, a lot of people say crisis is opportunity, as the Chinese ideogram says it. How do you see COVID as a crisis being an opportunity to further accelerate the green transition, as the Commission is now saying, also in the next generation EU, the funding should go towards digital and green transformation as well as resilience?
As we approaching to the end, I think it's quite a good question, summing up our discussion. So as you noted very well in your question, this transition we are speaking about, it's of course going to touch upon all the businesses, and doesn't matter, it's small SMEs, it's a larger businesses, but definitely this they will have to undergo transition, which is not easy. You know, it's way easier to speak than to implement most of those things, and what they will need, I've mentioned in my introductory speech, not only skills, different skills to people, but many more solutions to be applied. And of course, for all this, businesses will need funding. And I think that's the most important thing, that we cannot do a mistake. Biggest mistake would be returning back to normal or restoring back to normal your activities. With all those money, with huge injection of public money to be put in place, I think we can build that better. We have a unique answer, a unique opportunity to build back better, to rebuild stronger, to rebuild more green, more sustainable, on the path of the Green Deal. And put on track many of our economic sectors, and that's why I think this crisis is actually a opportunity to use those resources wisely, and secondly, that we have a good plan for it. I'm speaking about the European Green Deal, that we have a clear strategy, which is our growth strategy up to 2050. So nothing wrong to actually invest and apply it early on, and be the first movers. And a good example is climate goal. When we were one of the first ones to introduce it and to introduce the Green Deal, a lot, and from sector as well, we're saying that it's foolish to do so, because the world is not going the same direction. And look where we are only after 1 year, just 1 year passed since we adopted the Green Deal. We not only have China, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, and so on board, but seems like we have the United States of America. And it's, if you combine those countries who already contributed to zero CO2 emissions by 2050, China 2060, but still 2050, it's 2/3 of the world economy. And I'm very proud that we are the first ones to move this direction, the first ones to give a clear guidance to our businesses, and I hope we will be able, the first ones to reap off benefits, because all of this will require a lot of technologies, and I hope that our businesses will be the ones, European businesses will be the ones selling those technologies rather than buying them.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Sinkevicius, for these concluding remarks. And indeed, this actually is a good point at which to wrap up our session. I think it's been a very interesting exchange. You're really on top of your brief, and a lot of drive and passion. And as you have seen, and thank you for mentioning that again, that the retail and the wholesalers, although they are at the end of value chains, at least from closer to the consumers, they are in a way dependent on production cycles from value chains upwards. But on the other hand, they also have a certain role and certain power in the value chains. They're listening and they're interacting with the consumers on a daily basis, and they're all are in the best position as any sector, better than any sector, in terms of demanding back and passing those demands and those trends by consumers. And we see it as well. Consumers demand more and more. We are doing a survey currently also with McKinsey, and the sustainability of product is coming as a top priorities also for the chief executive of our sector. So this is something that we see. We have to work with our supply chain, make sure that, of course, they are responding to those needs. EuroCommerce, and thanks that you have mentioned that, I'm very pleased to be very actively engaged in the European circular economy stakeholder platforms, building upon the legacy of more than 10 years of REAP, Retail Environmental Action Program, and the Retail Forum on Sustainability with the Commission. So thank you for being engaged. We'll definitely respond to your invitation to continue to be engaged. Please consider us as a key actor in daily talks with the consumers on all kinds of value chains, food, non-food. We haven't talked too much about construction, but we have a number of wholesale businesses that are heavily and very importantly serving the construction industry. And this is very important also from a renovation wave, for example, which is a major initiative that is part of the Green Deal as well, and will also achieve these those objectives. So thank you very much. Thank you all for all the participants, several hundreds of participants who have participated. Stay tuned. Our next policy talk is going to be on the 25th of February with the Executive Vice President Margrethe Vestager on talk about a lot of the issues around competition policy, but also more broadly also aspects of digital agenda. In the meantime, Commissioner Sinkevicius, very warm welcome from our side. Enjoy the weekend. I hope you can rest a little bit, but thank you for all that, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Keep strong, and of course, stay healthy.
All right.